Few TV series mix grit, gunpowder, and glorious sideburns. Based on Bernard Cornwell's novels, the series follows Richard Sharpe, a former gutter rat turned officer, as he marches, fights, and swears his way through the Napoleonic Wars. Along the way, he collects enemies, lovers, and enough battlefield scars to make any surgeon wince. Across 16 episodes, Sharpe gave us iconic villains, rousing speeches, thrilling battles, and moments of pure melodrama. But not every adventure is a classic. Some episodes roar like cannon fire, while others stumble into the mud. So grab your rifle, fix your bayonet, and join me as we rank every episode of Sharpe, from the worst misfire to the finest victory. At number 16 is Sharpe's Gold. It seems like no matter how amazing a show is, there's always that one episode that just doesn't hit the mark. For Sharpe, that episode is Sharpe's Gold. Honestly, I think most fans would rank this as the bottom one on their lists. And it's not just the fans, even the cast and crew have shared that this episode isn't their favourite. This episode is the first one to stray from Bernard Cornwell's original novels. Instead, they went with an original script. While Sharpe's Gold still keeps the title and a couple of minor details from the book, the rest, it's completely new territory. But here's where the issue lies. It feels over the top and cheesy at times. Like they were trying to cram in way too much. Hugh Fraser is great as Wellington, but in this episode, they give him more screen time than usual. Unfortunately, it just doesn't really work. His character loses that commanding presence when he's wrapped up in a random unnecessary family drama. Not exactly the Wellington we know and love. Bernard Cornwell is even quoted as saying, "The TV programme bears absolutely no resemblance to the story in the book." Weird. The screenwriter Nigel Neal said of his adaptation, "I didn't use much of the book. I used the first 10 pages, then I had an idea which I thought would be more fun to do." Well sir, fun it was not. Sean Bean was also later quoted as saying that Sharpe's Gold was by far his least favourite in the series. The whole thing gets wrapped up in the most ridiculous way, with Aztec gold hidden in Spanish caves, Ellie's dad being held captive, and a ritualistic human sacrifice. I mean, come on, the caves look completely fake, the stakes are so low you could care less about the gold or the characters. Anyway, swiftly moving on from this one. At number 15 is Sharpe's Challenge. Set 9 years after the TV series ended, Sharpe's Challenge attempted to bring Sean Bean back into the fold, but did it succeed? While there's a lot of excitement surrounding Bean's return and the switch to an Indian setting, the episode ultimately falls short of recapturing the magic of earlier seasons. This 2-part TV movie is a weird amalgamation of details from the Cornwell novels Sharpe's Tiger, Sharpe's Triumph, and Sharpe's Fortress, which were set in India between 1799 and 1803, as well as original elements, all set 3 years after the Battle of Waterloo, but filmed almost a decade after Sharpe's Waterloo. When Sharpe's Challenge first aired, the sheer joy of seeing Sean Bean and Dara Marley back together was enough to carry the excitement, but years later the cracks in the episode are far more apparent. The rest of the cast mostly feels like background filler. Toby Stephens as the villain Dodd is probably a highlight. He plays the obnoxious bad guy role with ease, but that's not exactly a stretch for him. The supposed chemistry between Sharpe and Dodd feels forced, with neither actor given enough to really work with. The plot itself feels disjointed. Simmerson's return seems unnecessary and tacked on. It adds nothing meaningful to the story. The political intrigue inside the Indian fortress, which could have been the most compelling part of the story, is underplayed and far too rushed. At the end of the day, Sharpe's Challenge feels like a missed opportunity. The spectacle is there, but the depth of the character and story that made earlier episodes so captivating is sorely lacking. It is an ambitious return for the series, but ultimately one that fails to live up to the standards set by its predecessors. Number 14 is Sharpe's Justice. By the time Sharpe's Justice rolls around, there are only really 2 books left to adapt, so rather than sticking to the novels, we get an original story. A bridge between Sharpe's Revenge and the grand finale, Sharpe's Waterloo. And while Sharpe's Justice does attempt to tackle something interesting, the aftermath of war, it still feels like a filler episode that doesn't really hit the mark for me. The idea of showing what happens after the battle is intriguing, but it just doesn't really connect as an episode for me. The major focus is Sharpe's personal backstory, particularly his relationship with his childhood friend, Matthew Truman, who becomes a target for corrupt British officers when he protests for the rights of poor soldiers. While this gives Sharpe more depth as a character, it feels more like a diversion than a core part of the story. What I did enjoy, however, was the arc given to Hackman, one of the original riflemen. He's given much more attention here, and it's one of the few elements that adds something meaningful to the story. Then there's a triangle between Sharpe, Jane and Rossendale. This is where Sharpe Justice does shine, as it gives more context to their feud. Seeing Jane and Rossendale's perspective helps flesh out their characters, even though it doesn't make you sympathise with them. Although I did feel the acting in the final scene between Sharpe and Jane was really well acted. At the end of the day, Sharpe's Justice feels like a necessary evil. It's a filler story that serves a purpose, but doesn't quite justify its place in the series. It provides a bridge between 2 major events, but it doesn't do enough to stand on its own as a compelling narrative. It gives us a deeper look into Sharpe's past and character, but it just doesn't carry the same weight as other episodes. At 13, we have Sharpe Siege. Sharpe Siege kicks off the invasion of France and introduces a pretty solid premise. Wellington gets approached by a French agent, the Comte de Marquer, who claims he wants to betray Napoleon and help spark a rebellion. Right off the bat, there's tension. Can this guy be trusted? Or is he playing everyone? The espionage angle is actually one of the strongest elements here and keeps the audience guessing. For a while at least. At the same time, Sharpe's own story takes a more personal turn. He's finally marrying Jane. And you can feel the real chemistry between Sean Bean and Abigail Cruttenden. And that's probably because the 2 are married in real life at this point. One of the best early scenes is classic Sharpe. He's out with dinner with Jane, when we meet the episode's resident pompous British officer, Bamfield. This guy's instantly obnoxious, trying to bait Sharpe into a duel, and the way Sharpe's fellow officers handle it is brilliant. They casually name drop all of Sharpe's war heroics, until Bamfield practically melts in his seat. It's the perfect mix of humour and tension that the series does so well. Another scene what I quite liked was Harper's infamous tooth scene. Sharpe and the lads have to bluff their way into an enemy fortress, and it means Harper needs to yank his own tooth out. It's gruesome, it's funny, and it's weirdly heroic. But here's where Sharpe Siege does really fall apart, the fever subplot. Out of nowhere, Jane and Major Ross catch a deadly fever. While the idea of showing the army dealing with sickness has potential, it does feel completely disconnected from the main plot. You've got one storyline about espionage and war, and another about Sharpe's personal tragedy. But instead of weaving them together, it just feels like 2 different episodes awkwardly stitched side by side. Then there's the miracle cure moment, where Sharpe just happens to stumble across a massive supply of medicine. He's forced to choose, saving a dying French woman, or save Jane. But, to be honest, he's carrying enough doses to probably cure half the damn army. The stakes in this choice feel forced because it doesn't make any logical sense. And let's not forget the weird moment when the Comte's sister tries to seduce Sharpe. It's supposed to test Sharpe's loyalty to his new wife, but it's just a recycled storyline from earlier episodes, and it feels widely out of place here. We're meant to care about Sharpe and Jane's marriage, and now we're doing the Will Sharpe cheat dance again. For me, it's just the wrong time and the wrong episode for that. That said, Siege still has its moments. Some great set pieces, clever humour, and solid performances, but overall it does feel uneven. It's like a first draft that needed one more pass to tighten the story. At number 12, I have Sharpe's Revenge. Now technically Sharpe's Revenge is one of the most important episodes in the series, but it's also one of the hardest to sit through without rolling your eyes. Unlike Sharpe's Gold, which you could skip and never think about again, Revenge sets up major story arcs that carry through to the very end of the series, especially the complete collapse of Sharpe and Jane's marriage. So you do have to watch it, but it doesn't mean you're really going to enjoy it. It does start strong enough though, the final official battle of the war, Sharpe promising Jane that he's done with fighting and ready to settle down. Of course, as we know Sharpe, you know the promise is dead in the water. But instead of an organic conflict, the story spirals into a web of absurd misunderstandings, cartoonish manipulation, and plot convenience so clumsy they practically trip over themselves. Jane leaves Sharpe not because of anything truly dramatic, but because her new friend, Lady Molly, instantly concocts a plan to swindle Sharpe's fortune. We're supposed to believe this scheme, hatched in 5 seconds flat, somehow works flawlessly, as if every character suddenly lost half their IQ points. Then there's Duco, the one villain we've been building up for years. Instead of getting a satisfying payoff, Duco frames Sharpe for theft and murder in a way that's so flimsy it should have collapsed after a 2-minute investigation, yet somehow it escalates all the way to a conviction and near execution. There are moments where revenge shines. Captain Fredrickson finally gets some well-deserved screen time, and his awkward, tragic third wheel role as Sharpe and Lucille fall for each other is surprisingly heartfelt. Lucille, the French widow, is written and acted beautifully. She might be the best thing in the entire episode. The love triangle here, unlike the other one involving Sharpe, Jane and Rossendale, actually works because it's subtle, believable, and painful in a good way. Sadly, it all unravels again by the finale. The showdown with Duco, the series' longest villain, lands with a thud. It's rushed, unsatisfying, and feels like they ran out of both time and budget. Duco deserved a better exit, and to be honest, I think so did we. In the end, Sharpe's revenge is a necessary evil. You can't skip it because of how much it sets up, but the plot is flimsy. The melodrama is somewhat exhausting, and what could have been a tragic, powerful story mostly just feels unpleasant and sloppy. If ever a Sharpe film needed to be split in 2, I think this one could have done it. At number 11, I have Sharpe's Peril. Set directly after Sharpe's challenge, Peril ditches the oversized political intrigue of its predecessor for a simpler, stripped-down escort mission, which in theory is actually the right move. Unlike Challenge, which barely fit into its own runtime, Peril feels more in line with the self-contained structure of the classic series. Visually, Peril is impressive. The Indian setting is used to great effect, sweeping landscapes, colourful locations, and an increased budget that allows the action to feel bigger and bloodier than most of the original run. One of Peril's strengths is how it weaves its connections to Sharpe's past. Michael Cochrane's Simmerson returns, his 5th appearance, and though his inclusion does feel somewhat forced, he ends up being one of the film's highlights. Cochrane is as entertaining as ever, chewing every scene with glee, and Peril arguably gives Simmerson some of his best material in the series. The introduction of Barabbas Hagswell, the son of Sharpe's most infamous enemy, is another interesting narrative choice. Instead of making him a carbon copy of his father, the story flips expectations. Sharpe projects his hatred for Obadiah onto his son, forcing him to confront his own prejudices. It's a subtle, well-handed thread that adds welcome depth to Sharpe's character, in a story that otherwise doesn't really push much forward for him. That being said, Peril isn't without its flaws. Too often, the side characters feel like stock archetypes rather than fully realised people. The naive officer, the one-dimensional villain, they serve the plot, but rarely rise above it. The central villain is serviceable, but is forgettable, lacking the larger-life menace of earlier antagonists like Hagswell or Duco. Likewise, while the female lead is solidly acted, her storyline feels more functional than compelling, existing mainly to give Sharpe someone to rescue. I think if Peril suffers from anything, it's its lack of real tension. For a story meant to be dangerous and unpredictable, there's rarely a sense that things may go truly wrong. Still though, Sharpe's Peril delivers a solid enough adventure, bolstered by strong performances and some standout moments. It may not have anything to add to the groundbreaking series or to Sharpe's character, but as a final outing, it's fine. The theme's legacy, judgment and unfinished business helps give Peril just enough weight to feel like a fitting, if slightly understated, closing chapter for one of television's greatest soldiers. At number 10, we have Sharpe's Mission. Sharpe's Mission stands out as one of the few stories in this series not adapted from Bernard Cornwell novels, yet it manages to capture much of his style, delivering a solid, character-driven tale with one of the series' most memorable villains. Right from the start, it grabs your attention with what might be the best cold open in the entire series. In a flashback set 3 years before the main story, we watch the ruthless Major Brand, played with chilling confidence by pre-fame Mark Strong. It's a powerful, brutal introduction that sets the stakes high and perfectly establishes Brand's cold-blooded nature. One of the smartest moves the episode makes is giving us a villain who isn't immediately obvious to Sharpe. Usually, Sharpe sizes up his antagonists quickly, but here even he is taken in by Brand's charm and reputation. The slow burn of Sharpe's growing suspicion adds a welcome layer of tension, as we in the audience already know the truth but are forced to watch him figure it out. It's a refreshing change of pace that does keep the story engaging. Mark Strong's performance is a major highlight. Brand isn't the typical snivelling or cowardly villain Sharpe usually faces. Instead, Strong brings a calm, intimidating authority to the role, making Brand a genuine threat. Adding to the strength of mission is the introduction of Major Pycroft, a grizzled demolitions expert, forced to wear a hood and mask after a wartime accident involving Major Ross. Pycroft is one of the more visually memorable side characters, and his bleak humour and tragic backstory give him more weight than many one-off supporting roles in the series. That said, Sharpe's mission isn't without its weaker elements. The side plot involving Sharpe's wife, Jane, and the slimy con man masquerading as a poet feels tacked on. While it serves a purpose, planting seeds for Jane's character arc in later episodes, it just doesn't really gel with the main storyline, and ends up dragging the pacing down whenever it cuts away from Sharpe and Brand. The episode also lacks some of the large-scale battles or sweeping set pieces that fans might expect. While the more personal, focused story is a strength in some ways, it might leave viewers craving a little bit more spectacle. Still, Sharpe's mission is one of the stronger original entries in my opinion. Well paced, smartly written, and elevated by a top-tier villain performance from Mark Strong. It's a tense, satisfying episode that stands out as a reminder that the series could deliver fresh stories while staying true to its roots. At number 9 is Sharpe's Sword. This one's solid, plenty of strong moments, a nasty villain, and some classic Sharpe action. But a few things hold it back from being great. The plot is good. Sharpe gets tangled up in a brutal hunt for a French villain known only as LaRue, while protecting a mysterious young woman. Sharpe just always seems to get the ladies, doesn't he? There's plenty of intrigue, betrayal, and a sword fight that delivers. The story holds together well, but it slows down in places, especially during the middle stretch where the pace dips. Sharpe takes some serious hits here, literally. Watching him stripped of his confidence, wounded, and fighting his way back is a highlight. Sean Bean plays it perfectly. There's real vulnerability mixed with that stubborn grit we expect from him. The cast is in top form. James Purefoy also is a massive standout as Jack. You also don't expect to see him as the one that betrays Sharpe. But he does, however, have a really good redemption moment in the final battle. Colonel LaRue is a proper villain. Cold, sadistic, a real threat with his intelligence, rusing the higher officers about his motivations. One of the better antagonists in the series for sure. There are also a good mix of supporting characters, especially Father Curtis, who adds levity to the episode, as well as Simmerson, who returns and is as dastardly as ever. I do think the weak link in this is the female lead. The idea of a traumatised nun turning mute could have been really compelling, but it's kind of handled awkwardly. It's forced to rely solely on facial expressions. The performance sometimes veers into unintentional comedy rather than conveying deep trauma. To her credit, she does get really good strong moments, particularly the tense encounter with Simmerson that generally lands. But overall for me the character feels just underwritten. Still though, once the episode finds its footing, it delivers some of the best scenes the series has to offer. Intense, dramatic, and emotionally satisfying. The personal stakes are high, the character arcs are well earned, and the direction feels more cinematic than usual. It does capture the Napoleonic brutality really well, especially in the way LaRue operates behind enemy lines. By the time the climax rolls around, there's enough variety, emotional weight, and standout performances to make it memorable on multiple levels. A bit of a slow burn, but well worth the journey. At number 8, I've got Sharpe's Battle. Sharpe's Battle is one of those episodes that delivers everything you'd expect from a Sharpe story. Solid character work, good action, and some memorable moments. It's a well-made, entertaining chapter, but it lacks the extra spark that makes it truly unforgettable. The setup is decent. Sharpe is tasked with turning a bunch of untrained Portuguese troops into soldiers, right as the French attack looms. There's political pressure, a shaky command structure, and Sharpe once again being set up to fail. The Irish troops, led by Lord Kiley, offer a refreshing change of pace. Instead of the typical arrogant or incompetent officer Sharpe usually butts heads with, Kiley and his men come across as more naive and inexperienced than outright foolish. This allows the episode to explore different dynamics. Sharpe isn't just fighting the enemy or the system, he's guiding these men, which makes the character feel more layered. There's the subplot as well involving Kiley's love triangle, which could have felt unnecessary but does instead serve a nice purpose, although the payoff for this in the end was somewhat underwhelming. Sharpe's Battle takes some solid pieces from the books, especially around Sharpe struggling with command and politics, but the episode loses that gritty, realistic tone that usually carries Sharpe. It leans too hard on cliches, the ruthless Frenchman, the useless allies, and it just doesn't have the same edge. The French Colonel Lou is our main villain here, and he's fine, but forgettable. There's none of the impact or presence the villains like Hagueswell or Ducaux bring. The Portuguese recruits are meant to add tension, but they come off a little bit flat, and even the riflemen feel like they're just along for the ride. Perkins' death in the end is sad, and you feel the emotion there, but the scenes with Perkins and his lover just don't really add anything. Sharpe's Battle isn't Sharpe's Gold bad, but equally it's not Sharpe Eagle's great. It's just a mid-tier episode. Once you've seen it, there's not really much pulling you back. The action's fine, the story is serviceable, but it lacks the standout moments that make Sharpe episodes stick. At number 7, Sharpe's Enemy. This is essentially a continuation of Sharpe Eagle. The setup is fantastic. Deserters, British, French, Spanish and Portuguese take a village hostage, forcing Sharpe into one of his hardest missions. He's outnumbered, outgunned, and stuck negotiating with scum from both sides. The tension never lets up, and the payoff explosive, literally. The final battle for me is one of the best in the series, and the ending hits hard. The cast is stacked. Hagueswell returns, and once again he's the perfect snake. Vile, conniving, and dangerous. Harper and the Chosen Men take somewhat of a back seat in this episode. Harper mainly serves an advisory role. We also have Liz Hurley, debuting as Lady Farthingale, who we found out does have a history with Sharpe, which adds a plot twist to the episode. I think Sharpe's Enemy nails the tone of Cornwall again. Dirty, grim, and morally messy. No clean heroes, just survival and hard choices. The treatment of the deserters, the civilians, and the sheer brutality of the situation all feel authentic to the novels. Sharpe goes through all the emotions in this one, torn between duty, personal loss, and leading his men through an absolute nightmare. This episode forces him to be more than just a soldier. He's a negotiator, a strategist, and a man just trying to hold it together. Sean Bean sells every second of it, but the emotion you feel at the end with Teresa dying really cuts deep. The execution of Hagueswell doesn't really give you that sense of satisfaction, as he took away the one thing Sharpe at the time held most dear. It's still great to see Hagueswell get his comeuppance, but ultimately, Hagueswell won. Sharpe's Enemy is a brutal story, strong villains, and an intense battle sequence at the end. The lack of budget for the final battle is noticeable. It is however a common theme that the battles aren't as epic as they could have been though, but it's the characters that make this episode as good as they are. It is kind of everything you want from a Sharpe episode. At number 6 is Sharpe's Honour. This is a departure from the usual Sharpe formula of a hero battling a mission, battle, or enemy. It is much more of a character-driven episode. Sharpe's framed for murder that he didn't commit, and he gets pulled into a mission to find his accuser, but it's a slower burn compared to other episodes. The pacing can drag in places, and the stakes, whilst personal, don't always hit as hard as they should. There is some really good stuff in here though. The Marchesa adds the layer of intrigue, and Major Ducaux steps up as the puppet master, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Ducos is always a solid, cold, calculating and perfect schemer. The riflemen are sidelined a bit in this one in the beginning, but it does come together quite well at the end when they're there to save Sharpe. There is some solid personal growth here for Sharpe. He's not in a great place, and he gets dragged through hell, once again facing betrayal from his own side. You do see his loyalty tested, and Sean Bean plays it incredibly well. It doesn't have the same emotional beats as Enemy or Company has, but you do have more character growth, I feel, for Sharpe. Unlike other episodes where Sharpe's fighting for survival or victory, he's here fighting for his name, his reputation, and, as the name suggests, his honour. Harper gets some great moments here, particularly his loyalty to Sharpe when everyone else has turned their back on him. For me, Sharpe's honour stands out because it feels personal. It's not just about a battle or a mission. It's about Sharpe as a man, his principles, and what he's willing to risk to protect his name. It's tightly written, emotionally engaging, and features one of the most satisfying duels in the series. And number 5, Sharpe's Company. Another iconic episode that introduces perhaps the best villain of the series, Pete Postlethwaite's Obadiah Hakeswell. This episode is really packed. We're right in the middle of the brutal siege of Badajoz. Sharpe's fighting to keep his command. He faces the return of Teresa, now pregnant with his child, and dealing with the arrival of Sergeant Hakeswell, one of the nastiest pieces of work the show has ever produced. The plot moves fast, the stakes are high, and the payoff delivers, especially in the bloody final assault. Sharpe spends a lot of the episode trying to get approval to lead the Forlorn Hope into Badajoz. This is mainly so he can get in first and rescue Teresa and his daughter before any harm can come to them. However, as he is a valuable asset to Wellington, he is denied. This key plot allows us to see Sharpe's desperation and determination. Hakeswell steals the show as a villain. He's manipulative, cruel, and incredibly well acted. You just want to reach through the screen and just strangle him. Teresa adds weight to Sharpe's personal life, especially as she is now preggers. And again, the Chosen Men and Harper are consistent. Everyone is just pulling their weight here in this episode. Sharpe's Company really does stay close to Bernard Cornwell's brutal style. The siege of Badajoz is just as nasty as it should be, bloody, chaotic, and historically grim. It nails that mix of military action and personal stakes Cornwell is so good at. Considering the budget constraints faced and what they had to work with, I think they pulled it off. Shooting it in the dark was great and added that layer of grim horror. This is a big episode for Sharpe. He's fighting for his rank, his men, and now his family. You see the pressure stacking up, but Sharpe stays sharp, tough, resourceful, and always leading from the front. It just adds layers without losing who he is. For me, Sharpe's Company is one of those episodes you can just go back and back and back to. The siege, the personal stakes, and Hakeswell's villainy gives it a lasting impact. Landing firmly at number 4, I've got Sharpe's Regiment. Potentially one of the most underrated but tightly written episodes in the series. This one trades the battlefield for political warfare, and it absolutely works. The plot is Sharpe heading back to England to uncover corruption within his own regiment. What starts as a simple mission to find recruits turns into a full-blown conspiracy, with Sharpe fighting the system itself. The stakes are high, the pacing is tight, and the payoff is classic Sharpe. Exposing corruption and winning is incredibly satisfying. Sir Henry Simmerson is back, smug as ever, pulling the strings in the shadows. Add in Fenner, the slimy government official, and you've got the perfect mix of arrogance and cowardice for Sharpe to knock down. Plus, there is solid work here from the great Julian Fellowes as the Prince Regent, his second outing in the Sharpe series, as he was Major Dunnet in Sharpe's Rifles. Fellowes plays the Prince's over-the-top caricature, and it works. We also have the Lady Anne. Lady Anne especially messes with the audience, as you never really know what she's up to, or what her purpose in the story is. I will say that Colonel Gertwood is a cheeky favourite of mine, just a pompous nature with enough to make you want to throw something at your screen. We also have the introduction of Jane Gibbons, which adds weight both romantically and politically, although I would say that this relationship does feel a little bit rushed. This episode shows how the real war isn't just fought in Spain or Portugal, where men like Sharpe are disposable. Regiment is huge for Sharpe. He's completely out of his element, but he fights tooth and nail to save his men. Watching him navigate the politics, manipulate the system, and still keep the rough edge is peak Sharpe. It's one of those episodes that surprises you on a rewatch. No big battles, but the tension, the corruption, and Sharpe flipping the tables on the upper class. It just never gets old. At number 3, Sharpe's Waterloo. It was designed as the grand finale for the original run of the series, and for most part it absolutely delivers on that promise. Much like Bernard Cornwell's novel, it pulls out all the stops to make the story feel big, emotional and final, giving both characters and the audience a sense that this is truly the end of the road. By the time Waterloo begins, most of Sharpe's personal conflicts, particularly with Jane and Lord Rossendale, have all been resolved in earlier episodes in one way or another. The war itself had technically ended in Sharpe's revenge, and there's a deliberate sense of finality as the episode opens. Sharpe is quietly living as a farmer in Normandy, Harper is trading horses, and both men are seemingly done with war. That calm is of course shattered the moment history catches up on them, with Napoleon escaping his exile, raising another army, and forcing Europe into one last massive confrontation. There's a real one last ride energy to this episode, watching Sharpe struggle with a decision to return and then slowly reconnect with Harper and his remaining chosen men. It feels like the kind of nostalgic full circle moment we were hoping for. One of the best decisions here is focusing much of Sharpe's role during the battle on his placement under the Prince of Orange, played by a young Paul Bettany. The Prince could have easily been another stock and competent officer, but Bettany elevates the role with a performance full of smug arrogance. What makes it work so well is you believe the Prince genuinely thinks he's doing the right thing, which makes his mistakes even more infuriating. Watching Sharpe swing between biting sarcasm and outright fury is a highlight. If there's a slight flaw, it's that the sheer scope of the real Waterloo means Sharpe's personal story somewhat feels dwarfed by the historical moment. The series always balanced Sharpe's own battles with the broader war, but here, the need to hit all the major beats of Waterloo's history somewhat pulls focus away from the characters. Some of the supporting players, particularly the surviving chosen men, get less to do than you might hope for in a finale, especially as it's the last time you see them because of their deaths. I would have also liked to have potentially seen a bit more grandeur to the episode. The battles don't feel as epic and as large as they could have been, but that's completely understandable considering budget limitations. Still though, Sharpe's Waterloo nails the landing where it counts. The final moments, Sharpe, Harper, and what remains of their comrades reflecting on everything they've survived. It's certainly one of the most satisfying endings of the series, delivering both closure and emotional payoff without feeling forced or overly sentimental. As finales go, Waterloo is an impressive, ambitious send-off. It respects the characters, the history, and the audience, making it a must-watch conclusion to the original series. For me at number 2, it's Sharpe's Rifles, the episode that kicked this whole thing off. The mission is clear. Sharpe's promoted from the ranks and forced to lead men who don't respect him. Their task? Escort Teresa and her guerrilla fighters, along with a secret chest vital to the war effort, all while dodging the French. The tension is constant, the stakes are real, and by the end, when Sharpe finally earns his place as their leader and the mission is a success, the payoff feels earned. It's a simple premise that works so well. The supporting cast are the heartbeat of this episode. The chosen men aren't just random NPCs that make up the numbers. You understand each of them, and what makes them truly unique. Especially when it comes to Harper, who earns the trust of Sharpe, beginning the start of a blossoming friendship. The performances of Brian Cox as Major Hogan and David Troughton as Wellesley enhance the screen. Brian Cox is always a standout for me, and Teresa is a character vital in helping Sharpe understand the importance of good leadership. There isn't an out-and-out villain in this episode, as the story is more about Sharpe and his growth, earning the respect of his men. There are some changes to the novel. Wellington is actually saved in India at the Battle of Versailles, and not from a French ambush, for example, but these changes don't really impact the episode's quality. This episode is all about Sharpe proving himself, from an outsider with a battlefield promotion to a leader that men follow. It's believable, earned, and sets up his growth for the rest of the series. It also sets up future relationship with Teresa, whom he also grows to develop feelings for throughout. This arc doesn't overshadow the episode and adds great subplot to his character development. For me, Sharpe's rifle still holds up. The story moves, the characters stick with you, and it's a classic underdog tale. Every time you rewatch, you're reminded why Sharpe became an icon. I think if you're introducing a character for TV, this is a great template to start with. Finally, at number 1 is without a doubt my personal favourite, Sharpe's Eagle. It kind of has everything in it: a despicable villain, a sadistic lackey, Brian Cox being great, and Sharpe giving Churchillian-like leadership. The plot itself is deceptively simple, but that's the part of its strength. Sharpe is tasked with accompanying the South Essex, a newly raised regiment led by the odious Simmerson, on a mission to destroy a vital bridge to stall the French advance. From the moment Sharpe meets Simmerson, the class divide is laid bare. Simmerson loathes Sharpe, not because of any battlefield failure or flaw, but because, and I quote, "he is not a gentleman." That single line sets up the tone for the entire story, encapsulating the constant uphill battle Sharpe faces throughout his career. Predictably, the mission falls apart. Simmerson's incompetence and cowardice cost lives, including that of the Honourable Major Lennox. Before dying, Lennox gives Sharpe one final task: capture a French Imperial Eagle, the ultimate symbol of honour and victory, something no British regiment had yet achieved. What follows is one of the most satisfying story arcs in the series. Sharpe doesn't just complete the mission, he achieves the impossible. Taking the Eagle isn't just a plot point, it's a moment of pure earned triumph. When Sharpe presents the captured Eagle, it feels monumental. It's not just a battlefield win, it's the moment Sharpe cements his place in history, both with the world of the story and in the legacy of the series itself. What makes Eagle stand out for me is how balanced it is. Every character serves a purpose, no one is really wasted. Michael Cochrane as Simmerson is pitch perfect. Few characters in TV history are as instantly loathsome, and Cochrane leans into it fully, delivering lines with such sneering arrogance that you almost cheer every time Sharpe undermines him. He's the kind of villain you just love to hate, and it makes Sharpe's eventual victory all the sweeter. Daniel Craig is also unforgettable here. Long before Bond, he shows a real menace as Berry, a cruel, sadistic officer who abuses his power in a way that feels generally uncomfortable. And then there's Brian Cox, bringing weight and gravitas as Major Hogan, a mentor figure who gives Sharpe the chance he needs to prove himself. The growing bond between Sharpe and Harper is another highlight. You can feel the respect building between them. Two soldiers from different backgrounds, united by loyalty and shared experience. It's the start of one of the best friendships in the series, and it's handled with just the right amount of subtlety. What really elevates Sharpe's Eagle is how well it captures Bernard Cornwell's tone. The class war is ever present, and the battles are brutal, and the victories are hard won. There's no sugarcoating the cost of leadership or ugliness in 19th century warfare, but because of that, when Sharpe does succeed, it does feel really earned. Not handed to him by the script, but something he's clawed his way towards. And Sean Bean, this is truly his moment. You can feel every bit of rage, frustration and determination burning through the performance. Whether he's staring down Simmerson or rallying his men, Bean owns every scene. The pacing is also spot on. There's no wasted time, no sagging middle. The story keeps moving, from failed missions to skirmishes to personal betrayals, all building towards that final, glorious moment where Sharpe seizes the Eagle. It's one of the most iconic scenes of the entire series, both viscerally satisfying and emotionally powerful. If there's a single episode that represents everything Sharpe was meant to be, from the brutal honesty of war to the triumph of a soldier who refuses to quit, it's Sharpe's Eagle. It never gets old. No matter how many times I've watched it, it just delivers. The action is sharp, pun fully intended, the characters are memorable, and the ending sticks the landing like few shows ever manage. It's not just the best Sharpe episode, it's one of the best examples of historical adventure television, period. A perfect mix of story, perfection and payoff. Sharpe Eagle is, and always will be for me, number 1. Thanks for watching, Sharpe fans. Let me know in the comments what your list would be. And as always, don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more content. I'll see you over the hills and far away.